Bible tonight, we're going to be in Acts chapter 19. Acts chapter 19. Paul has left Athens and has moved on to Ephesus, where he had probably his longest ministry in the New Testament world. Ephesus was a major city in the New Testament times, and some major ministry happened from Ephesus and spread outward throughout that part of the world. We're going to see what happens in the passage tonight. Acts chapter 19, beginning in verse 23 through 41. Let's read. About that time there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. The way is the way of Christianity, the Christians. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. There's no little disturbance concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen in similar trades and said, "Men, you know that from this business we have our wealth." All right, so what's happening here? In Ephesus, what had happened was a meteor had fallen from the sky. And the Ephesians had determined that this was a sign from heaven. And they named this meteor the Greek god Artemis. Mike Kraft has actually been there. He was telling me about this last week. And he said he couldn't even take pictures of the statue because it was so pornographic. If you go online, you can read about this, and I'm sure you could probably, I won't encourage you to find pictures of it, but you could probably read about it and see what was actually going on there. But so they built a temple, and they were worshiping this god. It was terrible, obviously, what was happening. But what had sprung up out of that was the trade of the temple. And these silversmiths were making small representations or larger representations of the meteor and selling them. So if you traveled through or if you came to visit the temple, you wanted to take something home with you. So you would buy one of these small representations. Does this sound familiar? If you live in Taiwan, if you've been to any kind of temple in Taiwan, this is what happens here. This is so normal. If you go to any temple, they've got little things for you to buy. Little charms and amulets and things to represent the power of the temple. That's exactly what was happening right here. Now, what was the disturbance that happened? Well, Demetrius is very upset. And he says, "We're getting our money from this. We're getting our wealth from this." Well, what was Paul doing? All right, let's read on in verse 26. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods. And there is danger, not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship. Oh, so now you see what's happening. Paul has been preaching, and what's his message? The message is a God made with, this mic is too hot. A God made with human hands is what? Nothing. It's no God at all. And his message had permeated out throughout the culture. People everywhere had heard this message, and they believed it. And the sales of the temple items had gone tanked. And they were, now the people who made the temple items were angry. They were so furious. They were so upset. And they also claimed, well, even our precious Artemis, our precious goddess, she's at risk of not being worshipped anymore. But what were they really concerned about? This. their pocketbook. Let's keep going. Verse 28. When they heard this, the silversmiths, the workers, and the people in the town, when they heard this, they were enraged and were crying out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." So the city was filled with confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. But when Paul wished to go in among the crowd, the disciples would not let him. And even some of the Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent to him and were urging him not to venture into the theater. Now some cried out one thing, some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Some of the crowd prompted Alexander, who the Jews had put forward, and Alexander, motioning with his hand, wanted to make a defense to the crowd, but when they recognized that he was a Jew, for about 2 hours they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Can you imagine? 2 hours of chanting. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? When the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper of the great Artemis and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky? Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. For you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess." Notice the town clerk. It's his speech whom we have recorded, not Paul's. And what does he note about Paul's message? Did you pay attention to that? Paul is not blaspheming their God. Paul is not being sacrilegious. Paul cannot be accused really of any wrongdoing. We've talked about this before, how a Christian, we don't need to put down another culture's idols. We don't need to tear down. What we need to do is lift up the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's exactly what Paul has done. I'll say a little bit more about his message about idolatry in just a minute. For you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. Verse 38, if therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls, judges. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For we really are in danger. Here's the real danger that the town clerk saw. For we really are in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there is no cause that we can give to justify this commotion. And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. So here we have this tumultuous event, and Paul is conspicuously absent. However, the whole event is caused by Paul's message. What is going on? Idolatry. Idolatry. And that's the message for today that I want to talk about, is idolatry. What happens when true Christianity interacts with the world? Idols are exposed. The whole book of Acts actually has this message woven throughout it. We haven't really hammered in on it as we walk through, but let me point out a few places where we have seen it. In Acts 4, when Peter and John were arrested and brought before the council for preaching the gospel, what was really going on underneath the surface? An idol was being attacked, the idol of power. People were holding on to power. In Acts chapter 7, when Stephen was falsely accused and stoned to death, what was the idol that was being exposed? The idol of control. The leaders thought they were losing control. In Acts 13, 14, and 15, as Paul is opposed by the Jews, what's the idol they are worshiping that they feel like is being attacked? It's the idol of power and control. In Acts 17, Paul comes to Athens and finds a city dedicated to idols. There was an idol for everything you can imagine. So idolatry really is a theme, a major theme in the book of Acts. It reminds me of the culture we find ourselves here in the middle of in Taiwan. Seems you can find a temple with an idol for just about anything, any type of need you have. There's a God for the gangsters and policemen. By the way, did you know that? The one God serves both people. The policemen and the gangsters both go to the same God. Because both want loyalty. So you worship the God who provides loyalty. Kind of weird, isn't it? Seems weird to those of us on the outside. Did you know there's a pig God? Who worships the pig God? For prostitutes. For lust. There's a God for everything. It's easy to point out the idols of another culture. It's not so easy to see the idols of our own cultures. So I'm going to ask you tonight to look closely inward rather than looking carefully outward. Let's look inward at our own hearts and see what idols might be exposed as we go through this passage of our own hearts that we might need to deal with. We're going to learn some important things about idols tonight and our own potential worship of them. First, let's talk about this, the prevalence of idols. The prevalence of idols. All right? Verse 26 says that Demetrius was involved here. Now, who was this guy, Demetrius? Well, let me tell you who he was not. Demetrius was probably not a guy who went to hear Paul speak. Can we all agree on that? Demetrius was probably not front and center in Paul's church. Demetrius was not the regular attender, okay? Demetrius was probably not even a visitor. But somehow, Demetrius knew Paul's message. He knew Paul's message and he was unhappy with it. He's able to summarize what Paul is teaching very succinctly. This guy, Paul, says that gods made by human hands are no gods at all. How would he have been able to do that? How would he have been able to so succinctly summarize Paul's message? Well, Paul must have been saying it regularly. Why? Because Paul was in the middle of a culture filled with all kinds of idolatry. So Paul needed to say it regularly and often. And it comes straight out of the Bible. Paul's not picking at their culture obtusely. Paul is saying what the Bible says. That a God made with human hands is no God at all. That comes straight out of the Old Testament. So Paul is simply saying what the Bible says. Paul taught that if you make your own gods, they are not gods. And this had a huge impact on the economy. This is where people feel it, right? First and most. Can you imagine if we preached that gospel in such a way here in Taiwan, to the extent that the economy of temple economics was disrupted? Can you imagine that? Think about that for just a second. Let me just tell you a couple of stats about temple economics in Taiwan. Did you know that 80 to 85% of the total donations to religious groups in Taiwan went to one religious group? The largest Buddhist group in Taiwan last year. $2.3 billion US dollars. $2.3 billion US dollars. That's about NT, Taiwan dollars, $70 billion. 70 billion Taiwan dollars. Okay? That's just donations in the plate, or reported on taxes. That's not undeclared. Taiwanese people took around 43 million religious trips last year. Okay? That means I'm getting in my car and I'm going to visit a temple. I'm getting in my car and I'm going to visit a religious place. 43 million trips. Do you know what it's estimated they spent on those 43 million trips? $2.7 billion. $2.7 billion. That doesn't even call into account the money they spent on purchasing items. What about animal dealers? Did you know that each year in Taiwan, some 200 million fish, birds, reptiles, and mammals are released back into the wild? 200 million animals. I idolatry. Listen, you don't get the gospel until you see how it is opposed to idolatry. A lot of people think we don't need to talk about this. But don't mess with that. Don't talk about that. But the reality is that every culture in the world, not just Taiwan, but guess what? America, Canada, South America, Africa, Europe, Germany, everywhere, okay? We're all bound up in idolatry. Every culture, everywhere, is bound up in idolatry. Let me talk about my own culture for just a second. Western culture, okay? And this will identify with some of you in the audience. Western culture has an idol. It's called individualism. Individualism. Some of you have experienced it the last few days as the government has told us to put on masks, right? And your individualism has, you're not going to tell me to put on a mask. That's individualism, by the way. No one has the right to tell us anything, especially who God is or what we must believe. We get to decide who God is. I believe in a God who, I believe in a God that loves everybody. I believe in a God who judges this kind of people. That's expressive individualism. And this is the very thing that Paul says is wrong. You are not allowed to create your own God. That's what Paul is saying. You cannot make a God with your own hands. You cannot make a God with your own mind. God is revealed to us in the Holy Scriptures. This is who God is. What is an idol? Let's break it down and define it a little more clearly. You may believe God. You may believe in the God of the Bible. You may believe in Christian teaching. But listen, if there is anything that is functionally more important to your happiness than God, then you have an idol. It's not only bad things, it can be good things. This is the mistake that many people make, is we tend to think that an idol is only a bad thing. But actually, this is why we miss most of our idols, because most of our idols are actually good things. Your heart says, if I only have this, or if I have this, if I achieve this, if I could get this, then everything will be okay. Have you ever said that? If I could just have a boyfriend, then I'd be all right. Not me personally. If I could just get that job, then my life would be successful. If I could just get my parents' approval, then everything would be okay. If I could just buy that house that I wanted, then people would really think something of me. You see, these are idols, friends. This means that all good things, think with me, your family, your parents' approval, your children doing well. This is a tough one for parents. If my children would just act right. Career, money, achievement, acclaim, your looks, your partner's looks, your moral record, romantic relationships, politicals. If my candidate if this person could just win the election, then everything would be okay. That could be an idol. Oh, there's so many places for us to go wrong. All right? Are we seeing a little more clearly now? See, an idol is not simply a wooden thing that we stick at the back of a temple. An idol can be something that we create inside of our minds and we place deep within our hearts. So let's see clearly the prevalence of idols. They are everywhere for all of us. So be careful, friends. Be careful. The second thing I want you to see is the strange paradox the Bible teaches us, that idols have a power and weakness. They have power, but they're also incredibly weak. What do I mean by that? You can see the power in this passage. Paul is preaching and there's a riot. When you attack an idol, there is real power that gets released. If you try to take something that is an ultimate thing from somebody, the thing that is their hope or their safety, then it is highly likely they will go ballistic. Think about that for just a second. When you have in your mind that if you could just get this thing, that everything would be all right, and then you don't get that thing, what happens to you? You're crushed. Some of you are crushed, and some of you go even harder to get even more. In this sense, they have a great deal of power. They control the people who worship them. And if you push on them, they push back. On the other hand, the Bible also talks about idols as being empty. They're empty. And that's what Paul is trying to teach us here. That an idol, anything made with human hands or human thoughts, is no God at all. It's nothing. It's nothing. This passage is really interesting, and I hope that you'll take time when you go home tonight or this week to go back and read the whole set of Acts chapter 18 and 19 together. It was very interesting of Luke to keep this passage. Especially the fact that he records not what Paul says, but that he records what the clerk says. The clerk is saying is this: you say that these preachers are disrupting the social order, but actually you citizens are disrupting the social order. The Romans could come down on us. They could declare martial law. That's what the clerk is trying to get out to everybody. It's the violence of the idolaters that is disrupting the social order. What's the Holy Spirit trying to tell us here? It is this, that idols will never give you what they promise. They will not give you what you ultimately want. They will always take something away from you. They will always take something away from you. And they will always take more than you want to give. What does it cost to destroy an idol? How do you destroy an idol, and what does it cost? The only way to destroy an idol is to do so at a cost. Paul could have been killed. That's why his friends were saying, Paul, do not go in there. If Paul would have gone into the crowd to try to speak, it's very possible they would have just ripped him to shreds. And his friends were smart and said, do not go into this crowd. There is no way to oppose idols without exacting a cost. Ephesians 6:12 says this: for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So when you deal with an idol, you're not just dealing with something physical. You're dealing with a spiritual power. So how do we smash the idols in our life and the culture around us? Because remember, as we learned last week, Paul is also about pushing the gospel not only into our hearts, but out into the culture. So we must be about taking the gospel out into the culture. Here's how we do it. In the Old Testament, idolatry was almost always likened to spiritual adultery. Spiritual adultery. God considered it like this. It was like a married woman who was turning to other men, or vice versa. Okay? So that's the way God considered idolatry. If you worshipped idols, it was like if one partner in the marriage went and had an affair. That's the way God looked at idolatry. And God says to Israel, when they committed idolatry, here was his message to them: I'm going to divorce you, and I'm going to bring you back. Here's the problem with that message. In the Old Testament, do you know what the penalty for adultery was? What was the penalty? Stoning. Death by stoning. If you committed adultery, if you were an Israelite in the Old Testament, If you committed adultery, the penalty was death by stoning. Do you remember in the New Testament the Jesus story, the woman caught in adultery and the men dragged her in front and they were ready to stone her? That's where that came from. That's out of the Old Testament. They wanted to stone her. So this is the penalty, is death. If a human woman or a man commits adultery, the penalty is death. So how does this work then, that God says, I'm going to divorce you and then I'll bring you back? Jesus, our true husband, came and died in our place. And he bore the cost of the adultery, of our adultery. Jesus bore the cost of our adultery, of our idol worship. He paid the penalty and he took our punishment. That's what it means to be a Christian. That's what it means to have idols rooted out of your life. And here's the thing, it's not enough for you to say, well, that's really interesting, that's a nice way to think about it. What are you going to do about it? That's what I have to ask tonight. What are you going to do about it? Here is how you deal with the idolatry in your life. You don't need to, you might walk away from this and you could say, well, I just need to, love bad things or even love good things less, and I need to love God more. No. You must love God more. You must love God more. But how do you do that? You just go home and kind of sit and go, oh, I'm trying to love God more, trying really hard, loving God more. Is that how that works? No. You must make an effort. Here's kind of how it looks. It'll look a little bit different for each of you, but here's kind of how it looks. You must know and see Jesus. Well, it's like in the singing. When we're singing and you're thinking about those words, it's like when you're reading the Bible and you're reading the story of who Jesus is. It's like when you read through the crucifixion now, and you read that story about Jesus making a sacrifice for you, and you start to think, and you realize, you know what? Jesus gave himself for me. He didn't have to do that. And you begin to meditate on these things, and you think about it. It begins to change you, and it deepens your love, and it grows your love. My wife and I have been married for 25 years. 25 long years, as both of us can say now. I can say, honestly, that my love for her today is much, much deeper than it was. I thought on the day that we got married, we stood at the church and said, I promise to do this and all that. I love you. And I thought on that day, my love was just amazingly big. But now I realize, looking back, that on that day, I just had the little tiniest piece of love for her. Because I didn't know her that well. But now I know her. I know that I have a wife who's willing to stay up late doing the laundry. I know I have a wife who's willing to make my favorite food, if I just mention it. I know I have a wife who's willing to put herself out for me and my kids. And when I think about that, I just have to think about it, and my heart just kind of fills up with love for her, because I think, wow, nobody else would do that for me. Nobody else would do that for me. Only her. So how could I not love her? So you see, are you walking? Are you with me a little bit? So you see, if you think about Jesus that way, nobody else would die for us. Only him. Nobody else would leave heaven, the beauty of heaven, the glory of heaven. Nobody would leave that and come down here and walk on dusty roads, and be born in a manger, and deal with all the things he dealt with. He did. For me. For you. You think about these things. You put them in your heart, and you put them in your mind, and You meditate on them, and all of a sudden, guess what starts to happen is you start to love him more. And you love those things less. Because you see they won't do that. Your job, guess what your job won't do? Your job won't sacrifice for you. Your family can be you can have a really great family, but guess what your family won't do? Your family won't go to the cross and pay for your sins. They can't. Jesus will. So you think about it. And then the idols in your life, whatever they are. I think I'm starting to learn what my idols are, and I hope you're maybe thinking about it tonight. Then you can start to take those idols and destroy them. They melt away, they burn away in the beauty and light of who Jesus is. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight, and we want to see you, want to know you, want to have a deep love for you that's true and motivated by our real knowledge of you and who you are. So I pray for each one here that you will help us to grow in our love for you and our appreciation of what you have done for us. You are beautiful. You are amazing. You are our Savior, our Master, our friend, our shepherd, the door, the way. You are the truth. You are our life, our breath, our hope. You're everything. We need you. Would you help us this week to take the idols in our lives and put them away. Destroy them, Lord Jesus, so that we can serve you fully. I ask this in your name. A couple of announcements before we end the service. The situation with the coronavirus is, as we know, a fluid situation. So we're not totally sure how it's going to play out over the next few weeks. I think we can assume it will probably get worse before it gets better. That's just, reality. We have to deal with reality. And so we'll ask you to please make sure that you pay attention to the line group, and that is the way that we will communicate with you. And then we'll post on our Facebook page and our Instagram account for people maybe who are not in the church but are looking for information, and not on our Google page, because that is how most people find us. If there were to be a change in how we conduct our Sunday services, as far as we know, we will continue to have Sunday services. If there were to come a day where we could not meet for some reason, I hope that doesn't happen, but it could possibly down the road. Everybody hear me clearly, okay? Nobody panic or freak out. I'm simply saying, if it were to come about that we could not meet, we will work on providing a live stream of some worship and the sermon so you could watch from home, okay? But at this point, we have no intention of canceling services, and we encourage you to come. It may come. We're going to look to the Center for Disease Control, the Taiwan Center for Disease Control, for our instructions about how best to conduct ourselves in public gatherings. Okay? And so if they instruct us that we should wear masks, then we will encourage you to wear masks when you come to church. If you came in tonight, you may have noticed some of you got your hands sprayed with some alcohol. We'll probably start doing that so when you come in next week, make sure you do that. We'll just try to be as careful as we can. As you know, the very best thing that you can do to prevent the spread and transmission of any disease is washing your hands. Okay, so everybody wash your hands. That's fine. Just feel it.
Speaking of the line group, that's the best way to send in your prayer requests. Please send those in. It doesn't matter if you don't have to wait until someone is very sick or you lost your job. We'd love to pray for you in your general requests during the week. So even if you think, oh, this is a very small thing, we really love praying for you. So please send in your prayer requests via the line group. A number of people will go to Jungyo as always, and if you want to go to Jungyo department store and you want to know how to get there, you can talk to me or you can talk to Emily.
Emily's gone.
Emily's not here.
So she's back in America, so you can talk to me or...
Talk to me. I mentioned at the beginning, but if you would be willing to help us, just teach us how to say peace be with you in your heart language, come talk to me. I'm trying to get a list of people who are willing to do that. The Love Your Neighbor Conference is just a few weeks away, so please sign up for that. And then just a reminder that soon we'll be having our upcoming spiritual gifts and finding your place series. And so when you start seeing information through the line group about that, that's what we're talking about. We want to end on a joyful note. We want to end making a joyful noise to the Lord and telling Him that we trust Him and that we love Him. So will you stand with us?
Offering.
And we'll take our offering.